see you. Good to have you along with us. And of course, good to be seen by you and those listening on the audio version. Good to be heard by you. I'm today in Minneapolis, again sitting down, and I try to alternate because we do this as a daily podcast between standing up and sitting down. And all week I've been sitting down. So this is my little reminder that I need to stand up. If you're following along on the live stream, let us know where you are, where you're coming from, what you're doing, standing up, sitting at work, on an elliptical machine, whatever it is that you do to pay attention to these things. We'd love to know about it. You know, our little podcasts are designed as a place where we take this open-eyed and hopeful journey into the questions of what's going on and what can we do in light of it. And science is such an important part of this. A relationship between faith and science certainly is an important part of this. And because it's Friday, joined by the co-host on Fridays, astrophysicist Paul Wallace, and today also biologist Michael Zimmerman. And Michael runs the Clergy Letter Project, which we're going to hear about. It's really exciting. It's an endeavor, as they describe it, that's designed to demonstrate that religion and science can be compatible and to elevate the debate and the conversation between each of those. So we're really glad to have you along. Thanks for being a part of this today. And good morning, Paul. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Paul, your great idea was to invite Michael onto this podcast. I'm so glad you did. Tell us why that is. Why are you so excited to have Paul along with us today?
Well, I first learned of Michael's existence about 10 years ago when I started to write online about science and religion kind of stuff. And he came just online is where I discovered him. And he is the, like I said, the director of the Clergy Letter Project. He's based in Olympia, Washington. And what this project does is seeks signatures of clergy, not just Christian clergy, but from across the religious spectrum, who support science, who are pro-science, who believe that science is the best way to explore the biophysical world, that science has something to say to us that's real, and therefore is very important for people of all faiths to learn from and to know something about. And just this morning, I've only been clergy for about a year and a half now, and just this morning I put my name on that list. I joined the Clergy Letter Project myself. And I encourage all clergy who are following today to do the same. But before I start talking too much, I would like to have Michael Zimmerman tell us about the project and about his experience with it, what he's learned from it. Just give us a quick rundown of what you've been working on, Michael.
Well, thanks very much, Paul and Doug. It's good to be with you today. You've provided a very nice introduction. The Clergy Letter Project is an opportunity for scientists and clergy to come together to demonstrate that science and religion can indeed be compatible, that there's nothing about science that is inherently anti-religious, that science is an interesting way of understanding the world. It teaches us a great deal about the world, and what it teaches us is not at odds necessarily with what religion teaches us. The Clergy Letter Project, when it began, was focused on teaching of evolution, because one of the main places where science and religion seems to be in conflict in the minds of many, not necessarily religious leaders, but in the minds of many people and in the minds of many school boards, is the teaching of evolution. So the Clergy Letter Project itself, the letter itself rather, began as a Christian clergy letter with thousands of Christian clergy members saying that they encourage school boards to teach evolution. Over the years, we've grown in two different ways. We've grown to, as you said, Paul, to include members of other religions. So we have a Unitarian Universalist letter, we have a Rabbi letter, we have a small Imam letter, we have a Buddhist letter, we have a Humanist letter, all of which have scores and hundreds and in some cases thousands of clergy who have signed on to demonstrate that evolution should be taught in public schools and should be taught everywhere. Then the second piece of what happened with the Clergy Letter Project is clergy members have discovered that science and religion come together in many other avenues as well. For instance, biology teaches us that we as humans are all closely, excuse me, are all closely related to each other, and therefore the concept of racism just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Religion teaches us the very same thing. So clergy members have come forward and said, we're opposed to racism in all of its forms. We're opposed to homophobia. We're opposed to Islamophobia. Most recently, although we've recognized the importance of caring for the natural world, most recently, Clergy Letter Project has started another letter called the Climate Crisis Letter, which was written jointly by clergy members and scientists, which have called for immediate action on our climate crisis. So in all of these ways, science and religion come together to demonstrate the power of both, the importance of both, and the fact that although science and religion may have different methodologies, so often, excuse me, so often they lead us to the same conclusions.
So what is, I mean, so Paul introduced himself that he's not only a professor, he's an astrophysicist, but he's also now a clergy. I'm a pastor by training and an activist in the world. But you didn't get into this by being a clergy. You got into this from the other side, from being a biologist, right? What were the circumstances that said to you, hey, I should dedicate a significant portion of my life and try to recruit religious people, especially religious leaders, to have to make this statement about the relationship between science and religion, or science and faith, more pronounced? How did you find your path into this?
Got there somewhat accidentally in that I'm an evolutionary biologist. Years ago, when I knew nothing about creationism, I was asked, excuse me, something stuck in my throat this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked to review some documents for the ACLU dealing with a trial in Arkansas in the 1980s. All of a sudden I discovered what creationism was about and what it was doing, and the dangers associated with that kind of anti-intellectual view and anti-scientific view. I started doing some writing and some talking, and by doing all of that, occasionally I'd be invited to a town somewhere to talk to school boards that were taking extreme views about the teaching of evolution. In general, I never went to any of those meetings. I never went to those meetings because I learned very early on from people I really respected that no school board would ever want to hear from me. Partly because I'm boring and partly because of this and that, but most importantly for two other reasons. One is I'm from out of town. I mean, if I'm going to some other place, all of a sudden I'm an out-of-town expert. School boards don't want out-of-town experts. They want people who are in their community and are part of that community and have kids in those schools and care about what's happening right there, and are not, if you will, carpetbaggers in any way. Secondly, people for far too long in this country, maybe in the world, but especially in this country, we have a disdain for expertise. I have a PhD in biology, as I said. If I come from out of town and I come and speak as a biologist, people look at me as an expert and they say, you're biased. We don't care about your expertise. We care about what we know and what we care about, what we understand in this town. You don't know anything about us. You may know something about biology, but you don't know about us. So invariably what I would do is convince people who asked me to come to their school board is to get a grip, invite somebody more interesting, more pretty, and more intelligent, and especially more articulate, but more importantly, to invite somebody who is local. And I said, and they were always surprised at this, invite a clergy member to speak on behalf of science. They said, what do you mean, a clergy member? And I said, the issue is not a scientific issue, it's a religious issue. You want a clergy member to come and speak to your school board to say what you're promoting is religious in nature. It's in fact bad religion. It goes against my religion. It goes against many of the kids in school's religion. And what you're doing is forcing some other religion on them in the name of religion. And you're dressing it up to look like science. So I was doing that for a good number of years. And then a school board in Grantsburg, Wisconsin got a hold of me and asked for help. And they were introducing at the time the country's most stringent regulations about teaching of intelligent design and creationism. And what I ended up doing there was I drafted a letter for the deans of liberal arts colleges in Wisconsin, because I was a liberal arts dean in Wisconsin, got everybody to sign on, sent it in, and it made a difference, but not a big enough difference. So I drafted another letter that was signed by biology professors across the state and religious professors, religious studies professors across the state sent that in.
Nice. Yeah.
And then I drafted a letter from anthropologists and physicists, not physicists, geologists. And people said, well, what the hell do any of these people know about education? So I drafted a letter from high school and middle school teachers and had hundreds of those teachers send it in. We were beginning to make a difference, but I knew I had to listen to my own advice. And I needed a letter from religious leaders. But I wasn't a religious leader myself, as you say. I'm a biologist. So I had a friend who was a UCC clergy member, asked him to draft something. He drafted what has become the 2-paragraph clergy letter, Christian clergy letter, sent that around the state, got 200 signatures very quickly, and realized that's going to make a difference. So soon thereafter, when the school board in Grantsburg, Wisconsin backed down, what we had was a fight in Dover, Pennsylvania. And I realized, well, I'm in Wisconsin at the time, and Dover, Pennsylvania is someplace else. But this letter that we had written, which said we really want evolution to be taught in public schools, was perfect for Dover. So I decided to gather 200 signatures from every state in the country to get 10,000 signatures of clergy members. And we did that, and we began to get much more attention. When I hit 10,000 clergy members, I knew the press would really care, because 10,000 clergy members from across the United States saying that the school board was wrong, that religion and science could make a difference, was going to have a big impact. I couldn't get any newspaper to care. The idea of compatibility, we're not fighting, wasn't news. So at that point, I had a choice. I could do one of two things. I could just let the whole thing go, or I could declare a national holiday and decide that the Sunday closest to Darwin's birth was going to be called Evolution Sunday. And I asked these clergy members who signed on to do something to promote the compatibility of religion and science. And amazingly, on relatively short notice, we had hundreds of clergy members from around the world participate in the first Evolution Sunday. And we started getting news reports. They weren't big reports, but at least people began to hear about the compatibility of science and religion. And from that, we grew more or less exponentially. We had to change from Evolution Sunday to Evolution Weekend because religious leaders of other traditions, Jews and Muslims, wanted to participate, and they didn't do it on Sunday alone. That's when we expanded from a Christian clergy letter to all of these other clergy letters. And soon thereafter, we began to expand from just the teaching of evolution, which I shouldn't say just because it's so central to biology, which is therefore so central to science. And what this is all about isn't just about evolution and isn't just about biology, but it's about the very nature of science itself.
Yeah, and I think that's super important part of this, right? It has felt like the science-faith debate feels to me like it's about two things: identity and authority, and the role that those two play in each other, right? And there was a sense where clergy, especially Christian clergy in this country, but around the world, felt that they had a past, that they had more authority than other people to speak on matters of life and experience. And so people were very deferential to clergy. In fact, clergy had a lot of privilege in our society. There's a whole thing that, the clergy are the original profession. In fact, the word profession comes from the first clergy, the role of professing. So all of a sudden, science, many times over the course of our American history, asserts itself as saying, look, we also have authority. There's some things we know, and what we know really matters, and you should listen to scientists. And there's a lot of clergy who, not because they disagree with science, but because they because they find it discomforting to have the authority shift from one location to another. And I feel like, Michael, that's kind of what you were pointing out, where people at school boards or other places would say, well, you might know your thing, but you don't know us. Because the role of authority and identity is so important, and how do people understand themselves. And now we live in this point where I hear it every day, because I follow the news more than a healthy person should. And because of the pandemic, people are saying all the time, trust the scientist, believe the scientists. It's curious that there was a period of time when that's how people talked about church, right? Trust your clergy, trust the gospel, trust the teaching of your church. And just as people, like, we don't do well with that. So I don't know. I feel like that's a piece of it. And, Paul, you obviously teach at school and you're a clergy and you're involved in your own profession as a scientist. Do you see it similarly, that it's this issue of authority and identity?
Yeah, I do. And there was a period of, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago, I taught a course on evolution in our church. It was like a Wednesday night program, and it was like, it wasn't religious. I mean, it was in a church, but I taught them the basics of evolution. I'm no biologist, but I think I could get by, getting the basics across. And it made all the difference. What Michael was saying is true. If you come in as an outsider, if I had brought some biologist in who, taught at Georgia Tech or taught at Emory, that wouldn't have meant anything. But knowing that it was me, at the time I was not clergy, but I was a fellow parishioner, coming from me, in that context from within the community, it made a lot of difference. I don't think they left as experts on evolution, but I think that they left a little bit more, because we have what may be fairly or unfairly called a big tent church. We have a pretty wide spectrum of points of view. And I know there's particularly an older group that was pretty conservative. It was never an issue in our church. Not a point of contention, but I think it was very useful. And I do think that Michael's right, that being from the inside, being a local, makes a huge difference.
Michael, before we went live here, we were chit-chatting. One of the fears I always have of the podcast and live streams when we talk ahead of time is we always say the best things before we go online. And you said something I feel like was one of those best things. And it was, look, science is not made for third graders. And that's one of the things that I've been saying about faith and religion and the Bible. Like, don't let children read the Bible. These are not kid stories. And then what people do if they hear it as a child with faith or with science or with anything is they have to understand it at a level that fits the developmental stage of the person who you're teaching. And sometimes people get stuck there, right? They get stuck in a version of faith or of science or of math or relationships or of sports or whatever. And they stay stuck at a level that fits well as a 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, when a lot of times kids are starting to learn science. Or I don't know how old I was when we started talking about biology. I feel like it was 6th grade or something. I'm like, man, I don't know about the rest of you, but my 6th grade brain was not capable of understanding, a billion years in development of humankind. So it feels like in so many areas of our society and culture, we end up getting stuck, right? We end up with these child staged versions of the things that are important to us in our lives.
Hey,
yeah,
I think you said that nicely. And let me amend that fabulous statement, because I didn't think it was that fabulous to begin with. What I meant by saying science is not for third graders is what we know about science now. Some of the advances we make at the cutting edge of research can't be explained easily to a third grader, and that's really important to recognize. That
yes,
the news, even the New York Times, isn't going to be able to explain all the nuances of modern science. However, from when kids are first self-aware, maybe at age 2 or age 3, what they end up doing is exploring their universe. They're exploring their world. They're experimenting. They try this and they try that, and they realize this works and that doesn't. And what that is the basics of science. That is, you do an experiment, you have an idea, you do an experiment, you find out this seems to be false, and you move on to something else. And what kids begin to understand, although somewhere in there superstition comes in, but what kids begin to understand is, wow, the way I understand the world seems to work, although this new piece fits in this way and I have to change my interpretation of the world. Kids have no problems making those changes. Kids have no trouble being very simplistic scientists, which is what makes science so human and so interesting. But as we move on, and as science moves on, we have learned so much about the world. It is so much more complex. You're not going to be able to use that same simple language, right, but to understand the complexities. But what we have done with education to such an extent is beat the inquisitiveness out of kids. We beat the science out of them And we say, well, science is all about memorizing facts, and if you
Yep.
can do that, you'll be a great scientist. And that has nothing to do with what science is all about. It's not.
If
That's not
anybody
the
can,
exciting part of science.
if anybody can make it to 12th grade with their wonder still intact,
Yeah.
they have achieved something remarkable. You're
All right,
right.
so I have
completely agree.
this little clip that I want to play. It's a comedy clip from a comedian that I have laughed at for years, including back to 1998 when this little bit came out. His name's Lewis Black, and he when I heard this bit that he did back in 1998, it captured my own question about this issue of how we think about science. In this little comedy bit, he's going to talk about, sort of his experience with eggs of all things, and it has stuck with me that this bit. So we'll play it, and then we can chat about it.
The only thing we've come up with to deal with the fact we don't have an ozone layer is sunblock. And I don't trust that stuff at all. Because the people who told us about sunblock are the same people who said eggs are good. And then they said eggs were bad. And then they said they were good, and then they were bad. The yellows may not be good. The white, make up your mind! It's breakfast, I gotta eat!
Right. So this little bit where he's saying, like, I don't know who to listen to anymore. They say one thing and then they say another. And eggs is a particular one of these questions. In fact, if you go on YouTube and look for that clip from Lewis Black, you'll see about 40 different videos arguing about the cholesterol level and the benefits of natural fats around eggs. So I think that's important because people feel like they hear so many different things, right? And they don't know how to reconcile. And sometimes they've committed to an idea and then that idea changes. So it's not just faith in science and it's not just the age you get into it. There's really a maturity that we have to have as people to deal with new information and new understanding and an evolving intentional plan words, an evolving sense of our understanding of what is and how it is. And that in and of itself is comedic, right? I mean, I think Lewis Black is pulling out the fact that it feels absurd and then it's hilarious and people just want to eat breakfast. But I think that's getting at this notion that we struggle with the sense that some things should be understood long-term and kind of permanently and other things should be changing. And it doesn't feel like we do a very good job sometimes in our society of helping all of us know how to do that very well.
I tell my students that, I told them this, my astronomy students back until about, I guess, 5 to 10 years ago. I told them that we know a lot more. For example, we know how fast the galaxy rotates, right? It takes 250 million years for it to rotate once. Okay, which is this crazy thing that we can know. It's completely bonkers that we can know that. But we didn't know until very recently where the moon came from.
That's nice. Yeah.
The point being that science progresses not in this uniform kind of monolithic way across all subjects, but some subjects which seem pretty simple, should seem pretty simple, are actually really tricky. Cholesterol and eggs, whatever. And some things that you can't believe we would ever possibly have any knowledge of, we've known for centuries. So it's not one uniform thing.
Well, and Paul, it seems to me to some extent it gets back to what you said before about awe. I mean, there are so many things in this world we don't know, and what science, religious leaders, sometimes fiction writers, artists are looking for is a way into understanding the world around us. And we have different ways of understanding and different ways of knowing, and we don't know everything. If we knew everything, well, I don't think we will ever know everything.
Yeah.
What's so exciting about science is it proceeds by telling us what we don't know. It proceeds by falsifying ideas, not proving ideas.
Yeah, right.
So,
exactly. Yeah.
What's kind of amazing, you're an astrophysicist, you know this better than I. We understand very little about gravity. Everybody knows gravity, but we have no idea how it works. Yeah. And yet we don't go into public school and argue we can't teach the theory of gravity because we don't understand it.
Nice.
But we argue we can't teach the theory of evolution because we don't like it. We understand a ton and we know a ton about evolution, not everything, but a ton. But it's that that ability to learn more about the world that is so very exciting.
Yep.
And back to Lewis Black for a second, it's not really the scientists so often who are making these categorical statements about their work. Occasionally they are because they want press, but it's mostly the media. And I don't mean to be attacking the media as false media or this and that, but because science is complex and the news has to be somewhat simplistic, they make simplistic statements about complex issues, and they want simple answers. They want this is good and this is bad, yes or no, when in almost every case it's a maybe.
Yeah.
You know, and he could have said the same thing about red wine as
Yes,
opposed
of course,
to eggs, although then we would worry, why is he drinking lots of red wine for breakfast? And that's a different issue.
Yeah. So you made another statement there I think is really worth keying on, and that is that what science is doing is is telling us what's not true, right? And that's this whole scientific method, back to my 6th grade, if I remember right, with Mr. Bankston, and trying to say that, that you're going to make a hypothesis and then you're going to try to justify if that hypothesis proves out or not. And if it does, you didn't gain anything. This is how I remember it. If it doesn't prove out, in other words, if your hypothesis is wrong, that's the win. You want to prove that your hypothesis is not right. That's a different way of thinking about the world than most people approach their world, right? They want to approach their world as, there's a thing I know, I want to see if it's true. Oh, turns out it's true. Good.
I'm done.
There's something else going on here with science that it again feels like the scientists are doing a project. The rest of the people who are not in that are told, someone's trying to explain to them how to make sense of it. And it feels like there's different languages. And this is often the thing between religion and science, right? Is they're speaking different lexicons and using different ways of describing the world. But do you think that's a big piece of it, that people still don't fundamentally understand the scientific method and the role of hypothesis in the scientific method?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely a key to so many of our problems. In fact, for science to work, you have to be able to ask falsifiable questions. You have to be able to phrase what it is you want to learn in a way that you can actually do a reasonable test on. And without that, you have ideas, but you don't necessarily have science.
It brings to mind a quote, loose quote from Richard Feynman, said something like, a scientist must, in order to be a good scientist, must really bend over backwards trying to show that she's wrong. I mean, she's really got to work. I mean, the point of doing science is you've really got to hammer your idea from every possible direction. You've got to bend over backwards trying to show that you're wrong in order to be right.
And,
I mean, that is so, go. Go ahead, Michael.
He, not surprisingly, he said it well because he's so prolific and so wonderful. But that doesn't mean that every scientist does that. It doesn't mean that scientists are not human. Scientists, have theories, have ideas, and often we like them. We know how to disprove them, but in our heart of hearts, we hope we don't disprove it because we want our name associated with that theory. Back to what you said, Doug, also though, we are speaking we are speaking different languages, but we're using the same words. And so often that's problematic because, for instance, we use the word theory, and in science, there's nothing higher than theory. An idea doesn't become a theory easily. It has to have a ton of data that has predictive value and supports the idea before it rises to the level of theory. In common parlance, you wake up one morning, you have an idea, you say, I have a theory. And when people hear that a scientist has a theory, they think that, it's just an idea that they woke up with in that way.
Yeah.
Pure
speculation.
Absolutely, and in science, theory just simply does not mean that. Let me, since you used a really wonderful quote, let me use a wonderful quote as well. It's from the Dalai Lama, and it's the epigram to our Buddhist clergy letter. And what the Dalai Lama wrote is, if scientific analysis were conclusively to demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then we must accept the findings of science and abandon those claims or adopt them as metaphor. Now, what that's saying, which is really so wonderful, is that when it comes to predictions in the natural world, science takes precedent over religion. Religion's dealing with another plane, with other kinds of issues. And it doesn't make truth claims about the natural world. It makes a different kind of truth claim. And if once you go there, you can't have conflict between science and religion. And that doesn't demean religion. It's just saying it deals with other, and for many people, more important issues than the mundane world of science, which for so many of us scientists, we find so exciting and awe-inspiring in the way others find religion awe-inspiring.
Yeah, that is such a great way to say it. And it makes me think, and the Dalai Lama's statement is so well articulated, that not only is it about identity and authority, it's also about power, isn't it? And in some ways, it's about the future, because I hear people who get nervous about science and they start thinking our scientific capacity is so extraordinary, it's going to allow us to develop all kinds of things that people's imagination is, it becomes unnatural, right? We're going to end up in a scientifically led world with an unnatural world. And this starts to talk about biology and starts to talk about the human, what makes somebody a human being, or where our crops come from. All of these advances, many of which we're quite comfortable with, right? Like, I don't know, phones and building techniques and, the food that shows up in our grocery store. But the next stage of development, the next stage of scientific advancement feels really scary. And I think people are really afraid that power is going to be given to certain people that pursue science without any other moorings, right? That it's not connected to morals or ethics or common goodery. It's just not hooked in. So people talk about science with this future, like the science fiction, and almost all projections of the future are like, we're going to blow this place up. Everyone's going to be like, hardly anyone has a utopian view of the future, right? People have a dystopian view of the future. And I wonder if we just somehow we're uncomfortable with the ability we have for the future, where religion kind of tells us something about our moment now and kind of our past, and future gets to kind of skip this world if people are into an afterlife. So I don't know. It feels like there's a fear around science that is science fiction driven toward a dystopian version of the world.
Yeah, I think that's nicely put. And I think part of that comes from a complete misunderstanding of the role of the scientist. Part of that is due to the scientists themselves, and part of that is due to society. Scientists can teach us about the world, but as you've said so well, it can't tell us what's right about the world. It can't tell us what's right about the science in terms of its morality and its use. When we talk about how do we use science, should we do genetic engineering? What kind of cloning should we do? How do we use nuclear power? Any of those kinds of questions. Scientists can inform the technical, and they should be involved in the political decision making, but they should have no more power in deciding the politics, the morality, than anybody else. They don't have insight there, or they don't have any more insight than a religious leader, a teacher. Absolutely. And science is one of the very few fields that self-limits itself. Science draws a boundary around the parts of the world that science can touch and can teach us about. Science can't teach us about everything. What it can teach us about, it teaches us wonderfully. But things that are outside of that box are not amenable to the methodology of science. And most scientists understand that and agree to that. And if the rest of the world could understand that, I think we would get along so much better than we currently do. And we could put science to the productive use and not be scared of it, and not let it control our decision making. Because I'm a scientist. I don't know anything any more about morality and politics than anybody else. In fact, I probably know a whole lot less.
Paul, what do you think? Do you find that in your you teach, one of the things I love about having both of you on is you have to think about this at like a college age level, right? You think about college age people who are thinking about science, not because they're necessarily scientists to begin with. You have to talk about it to others. How do people experience this in the world that you're in?
I think that Michael's exactly right, that really scientists as a group, have no special insight into the ethics of how to apply technology. Because that's what I hear you really talking about is technology. Not so much, a theory of evolution or a theory of even like in neuroscience, anything like that, but actually the application of these theories towards certain ends. I don't think that science certainly is empty in the sense of it can't direct us toward what ends it should be used for. There are people who seem to have written quite successful books aimed at convincing the world that science can do things like that. That science has the capacity to know what is good and what is not good. But I think ultimately that's a delusion. I think that's just a symptom of throwing religion away. You got to find it from somewhere, and if science is the only thing you believe in, then you've got to find your right and wrong from science. But I think that's a hopeless task.
And I think that, Doug, that takes us back to what you were saying, Doug, about the current pandemic, where people are saying, listen to the scientists, listen to the scientists. And I think our policy needs to be informed by the science, but it's not that the scientists are saying, this is what we have to do. Scientists, to the best of their ability, epidemiologists at least, to the best of their ability are saying, given what we know right now, and what we know a year from now may be slightly different, but given what we know right now, if we do this, this is likely to happen. If we do that, this is likely to happen. Here are the trade-offs. You need to make your choices. But when you listen to the science, you need to understand what those trade-offs are. We're not telling you that this trade-off is more important than that. We're telling you, here's what is likely to happen. Go forth, be fruitful, multiply, and make a good choice.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what that choice is.
I see that reference.
Your average person is not comfortable with contingent and incomplete knowledge. But that's all that science gives us.
Yeah,
at any given moment, it's contingent and it's incomplete. But what people want, like you said, Doug, was science says do this, and they want it to be the same today as it is next March.
Yeah, and I don't know if go ahead.
Let me jump in for a second. I apologize, Doug. But Paul, you're absolutely right. It's contingent and incomplete, but that doesn't mean it's useless. And
that's right.
We know more today than we did yesterday about almost everything, even though we still might know more tomorrow. And what some people hear when they hear contingent and incomplete is, why listen at all? Let's wait and not pay any attention until it's no longer contingent and it's complete. And it's never going to be that.
Yes.
So it's going to be better than it was.
Right.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you that is, and then also people, there's a self-narrative. I say it. A lot of other people do. I'm not good at math. I'm not good at science. It's not really what I do. So but then they're confronted with it, right? I'm watching on my television last night a whole debate about Catholic bishops telling their parishioners not to take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because of its origin, where they say it comes from, that has something to do with moral issues. And boy, here's this conflict back in place, right? And you can feel it in the reporting and in how people respond to a story like that they're like, well, who am I going to listen to? The epidemiologist or the bishop? And why are they fighting about this and putting this out? And then you see numbers on a screen like, well, the Johnson & Johnson one is 72% effective and the Moderna one is 89% effective. And I don't know, I'm going to go with the 89%. And then you start asking yourself, and I've listened to countless, I've lost count of how many stories I've listened to from reporters trying to explain the difference between 89% and 72% and what that has to do with efficacy rates and how you use statistics to understand how effective a vaccine is. Like, there's a whole language set I don't know anything about, but I don't know. I look and I see 72%, that's worse. The bishops say no, I'm not taking the Johnson & Johnson one. Like, most people spend probably 4 minutes a week thinking about science stuff. So it gets really hard, doesn't it?
That's optimistic.
Is it? So, I mean, this is just hard, and that's why we want to talk about it here on this podcast every week, right? Because it is such a crucial part of, our project here is to try to see what's going on in the world, how we can engage in it, and how the common good can be our criteria for how we live. And boy, science is crucial to it. But like all the other big issues in our society and our life, it's hard. This thing we come to know, and you know what people often refer to as adulting. Like the more you become an adult and the more things you know, you realize, okay, it's a little more complex than I thought it was, and I have to now move forward in the midst of a new level of complexity and understanding.
And uncertainty, people don't like. Uncertainty is not popular.
Yeah,
absolutely. One of the things that's so interesting, and it comes to what you started your last, I'll be polite, your last rant about, Doug, was...
Thank you. That's what I call it too, so thank you for fighting.
The fact that we're not, so many of us are not embarrassed to publicly say, I'm innumerate. I can't do math. I don't need to do math. We would never say, I'm illiterate and be proud of it. Mm-hmm. And we draw a distinction between things scientific and things numerical and things just verbal. And we need to reach the level in basic education where it's just as important to be numerate as it is to be literate. Not to be a scientist, not to be a statistician, but to understand basic probabilities and things like that.
Know how to read a graph, for example.
Absolutely, yeah. And we are so far removed from that in society right now.
Well, it's so funny you said that because I was looking at a graph the other day and I'm like, I don't think I know how to read a graph. I thought I did until I just feel more confused. So can you help a guy learn how to read a graph, everybody? I think that would be great.
There's certain things to look out for. I mean, people create graphs that intentionally mislead over and over and over again in the popular press.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, Michael, thanks for being here. Look, this I know we've gone a bit off of the Clergy Letter Project to talk about sort of the philosophy of science and how science plays in our world. But this is why the Clergy Letter Project is so important, right? Because the fact that there is one is newsworthy, at least, to this podcast and to the thousands of people who have signed this with you, that people are realizing, oh, clergy are signing off on a science statement. Those feel like they're two different worlds, and just bringing them together in and of itself, I think, starts to reconcile some of this work. So we talked about it a bit at the beginning, and as we close out here, can you say a little bit more, or say it again even for those who just tuned in or need to hear it a second, a third, fourth time, what someone can do, that they can go to this website if they're watching on the screen now, there's imagery of it here, and they can go to one of these places and they can click on a letter and they can add their name if they're clergy. If they're not clergy, what should they do? Sort of give us a recap of both of those.
Sure. What we have are are 5 clergy letters, all of which are promoting the teaching of evolution. If you're a clergy member, a Christian clergy member, a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, a UU clergy member, a Buddhist clergy member, or a humanist clergy member, feel free to sign on. We'd love to have you on board. The easiest way to do that is to just send me an email, mz@theclergyletterproject.org. mz@theclergyletterproject.org. Tell me how you'd like your signature block to appear, and we'll do that. We also, if you move down our navigation bar on the left, you'll see that we have the Climate Crisis Letter, which is a letter written by clergy and scientists demanding action right now on the climate crisis from both a scientific perspective and a religious perspective. We have about 1,000 clergy members from 14 different countries who have signed on there. If you go even further down on our navigation bar at the very bottom, go back up. I had you go too far down, back to the left.
How am I doing?
Right there.
There we go.
Resources. Sorry about all of that. Under resources, we have a list of scientific consultants. If you're a scientist but not a clergy member, and you are interested in answering questions from clergy who are interested in science, we'll list you there, and clergy members who have questions about your area of expertise can sign on. And Paul, you're signed on as a clergy member. I'd love to have you sign on as a scientific consultant as well. We can deal with that later.
That's right. What can we do to get you in this car today, Paul? Let's get you on that sign-up letter. Make you a resource today.
Exactly. You know, it'll come with a full tank of gas, and it's
That's
only
right.
been driven on Sunday, so it's good to go.
Yep.
If you're neither a scientist nor a clergy member, but you're just interested in the compatibility of religion and science, drop me an email, mz@theclergyletterproject.org. I'll put you on our mailing list. We have a monthly newsletter and a couple of other issues that come out occasionally. You'll be informed. Two things to say about our mailing list. We've never asked anybody for money. We do this on a shoestring, and the shoestring is free. So this costs nobody anything, except for me a little bit, but I don't ask for money. We've never sold our mailing list to anybody, so the only email you're ever going to get is from me, and frankly, you don't get that many from me. But if you're interested in learning more about the Clergy Letter Project, drop me an email and we'll communicate. One of the really exciting things about this project, and you've alluded to it, Doug, people didn't know that science and religion can be this compatible. People didn't know that you can believe in evolution, you can accept the premise of evolution, and still retain your belief in your religion. When I started this, I had so many clergy members write to me and say, I thought I was all alone. I didn't realize there were thousands like me. I've been to seminary, but we never talked about this at that point because there was no reason to. I thought I was in the closet in believing in evolution and also being a clergy member. What they've now found is there are thousands upon thousands of people just like them. The last point, and I apologize for going on at length, but the last point is really important. In our society where it's us and them, where we don't talk civilly with each other, we argue with each other, and we don't even argue, we just shout. The Clergy Letter Project is an opportunity for people with divergent and different viewpoints to make the case that it's possible to have civil discourse about complex issues. It's possible to teach each other something and to move beyond the simple, you're wrong and I'm right, to, well, yeah, there's something about what you're saying, but listen, there's something about what I'm saying. Isn't there something in the middle where we can come together and move forward? And what's interesting about the Clergy Letter Project from my perspective is it's populated by clergy, many of whom are progressive clergy, but a fair number of whom are as far right politically as you can imagine. I don't agree with many of their politics, but I agree with their beliefs in the compatibility of science and religion. So we can talk about what we agree on, and we don't have to argue about everything. And by agreeing on something, it brings us closer together about everything else. We can begin that conversation, and where that conversation takes us, we don't know. And that's enriching and enlightening. And as a long-term educator in higher education, a promoter of the liberal arts, that's what the liberal arts is all about. It's seeing how others believe and understanding what they believe and why they believe, trying to understand that and trying to teach them about why we believe that something is different without beating them over the head and saying, I know I am right and you are wrong. It's saying, hey, let's learn from each other and let's do it in a way that allows all of us to grow. That's what we're all about.
That's really well said. That's a Pagitt level rant right there. I love it. Hey, there's this old adage that people would say that, education is wasted on the young, right? and we don't mean that about other people. We mean it about ourselves, right? That like once you're 22 and you're out of college, somehow your world changes. You don't have access to all those other ideas and all those other interplays and all those other new voices in your head. Your world starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so a project like this is one that opens it up the other way, like pushes it the other direction. And it's a lifelong project for people to have to keep opening and keep listening and keep growing and keep knowing. And it just gets harder. Our society is not set up for people post-college to widen their parameters and to think more extensively. So anytime people are doing the great kind of work you're doing, especially people that do it for, this has been a decades-long project that you've been doing for the common good. I just want to applaud it and thank you for it, and recognize what great work that you've accomplished here and that you continue to do. Paul, any final words with us today?
Kind of you to say that.
Oh, you're welcome.
No, I think Michael just knocked it out of the park a second ago. I don't have anything to improve. I can't improve on it. So it's great to see you today, Michael. Great to finally meet you virtually.
An honor to be with both of you and to be on this podcast.
Great. Well,
Thanks.
thanks all. Hey, we do this every week, folks, or every day of every week, weekday at least. So join us on Monday. We do roundups of the news. On Tuesdays, we talk specifically about politics. On Wednesday, we have a faith conversation with pastors. On Thursdays, we look at important issues, and then on science, we talk about science on Friday. So a lot going on and a lot happening in our world. If you're already connecting to us on our podcast, do. If you're not much even of a podcast listener, and this can be the first one you're ever going to sign up for, we'd love that. We love when people do that and let us know where you're listening and how you're listening to us on all of this. So thanks for being a part of this today, Paul, Michael. So good to be with you guys today, and happy Science Friday from your friends over here at Vote Common Good.
Thanks a lot, Doug.